When I called to say, I just refinished the deck at the cabin, my son went silent. His arrogant confidence, or perhaps the comfortable quiet of a man thinking, completely dissolved into a tight, airless silence, the unmistakable stillness of a man caught. Then his wife's voice slid into the line, smooth as river water over a flat rock. "Laura, we sold that cabin 7 months ago. Didn't Tyler mention that to you?" I stood in my kitchen in Denver, holding a cup of coffee that was quickly going cold in my hand. Outside, a light wind was rustling the bare aspen branches. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in October, yet my entire reality had just shifted. Anger was not loud this time. It was entirely clinical. When you spend 40 years running an industrial mechanical contracting and construction firm, like Low Mechanical Controls, your brain automatically learns to bypass panic. When a critical structural support column cracks on a job site or a high-pressure line breaches, you do not waste time screaming at the debris, you do not cry, and you do not ask why. You immediately isolate the structural failure, shut down the primary valves, and contain the damage before the entire system collapses under the weight. I did not break down. I did not give Tyler or Kayla a single second to piece together a curated excuse, a fabricated timeline, or a pathetic plea for understanding. I simply pressed the red button on my screen and ended the call. The river water smoothness of my daughter-in-law's voice vanished instantly, cut off mid-breath. The silence that rushed back into my kitchen was heavy, but my mind was completely clear. I didn't feel sadness, and I didn't feel despair. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of maternal regret, but there was only a sharp, icy clarity. This wasn't a family dispute anymore, this was a forensic audit. I sat down at the grey granite kitchen island, slid my cold cup of coffee to the side, and flipped open my personal laptop. The screen glowed in the dim morning light, casting a pale reflection across the polished stone surface. My fingers moved over the keys with the steady, unhesitating precision of an architect executing a demolition order. My compassion had been a luxury subscription they had overdrawn for over a decade, and the cancellation policy was going into effect immediately. It took me exactly 12 minutes to strip away the financial scaffolding I had built around my son's life. First, I logged into the commercial banking portal and froze every corporate credit card I had issued to Tyler under the business name. Next, I terminated his digital administrative access to the company's operating expense accounts, completely blocking his ability to draw funds for his supposed expenditures. Finally, I accessed my private trust accounts and deleted the automatic monthly allowance transfer that had been quietly deposited into his and Kayla's joint bank account every single month. The soft, rhythmic whirring of the laptop fan was the only sound in the empty house, a tiny mechanical hum baseline to the frozen stillness inside my chest. I shut the laptop lid with a solid, echoing click. I stood up, walked over to the large windows, and looked out toward the rugged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The first winter snow of Denver was just beginning to slowly fall, thin white flakes drifting against the dark grey sky. The temperature outside was plummeting, but inside me, a different kind of winter had already settled in. My son and his wife weren't shocked by the unforgivable crime they had committed, they were only shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. The balance sheet of my life had officially changed, and my quiet, digital retaliation had just begun. I walked down the narrow hallway to my home office, where the air smelled faintly of old paper and blueprint ink. I sat back in the heavy leather chair, took off my glasses, and rubbed my eyes. I pulled a fresh yellow legal pad to the center of the desk, uncapped a fountain pen, and began to write. This wasn't an act of grief. It was an audit of 11 years of misplaced faith. I listed the baseline transactions first. 4 years of tuition, housing, and expenses at the University of Denver, $72,000, paid in full because that is what mothers do. Graduate school application fees and prep courses the year Tyler decided law was his calling, before he decided it wasn't $8,400 gone and never mentioned again. The down payment on their house in Cherry Creek 6 years ago, $60,000, framed as a loan, but treated as an unreturned gift. Then came the peak of the extraction. Kayla's green energy consulting projects launched 3 years ago, with $120,000 of my money. The business dissolved after 11 months. Kayla blamed the market. She never offered a repayment schedule. I looked at the data points stretching across the page. My compassion had been a financial asset they systematically drained. Anyone watching my life might ask how a woman who commanded concrete and steel on massive construction sites could allow herself to be used as a personal automated telemachine for 11 years. The truth is, my silence wasn't weakness. It was the invisible chain of a survivor. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, the foundation of my world shattered. The only thing left standing was that rough A-frame cabin on 23 acres of protected pine forest in Estes Park. It was the sanctuary he built with his own hands. I added Tyler's name to the deed beside mine as a gift, an emotional anchor to keep him connected to his father's memory. I normalized their endless financial demands, treating each check as a subscription fee to keep my remaining family from drifting away. I was terrified of the isolation, so I became the silent investor in their theater of affection. But by selling that sacred memory, they didn't just extract capital, they demolished the sanctuary. The invisible chain is broken, and the ledger is officially closed. The phone started ringing into the quiet of the afternoon. It didn't ring with the hesitant tone of someone seeking forgiveness. It vibrated against the mahogany desk with a persistent, aggressive thud. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, but Tyler called back immediately, his voice shifting from defensive panic into an outright offensive strike the moment I finally pressed accept. "Mum, what is the meaning of freezing all my corporate expense cards?" "I told you, it was a brutal timeline, and we needed quick cash to rotate our capital. You are blowing this completely out of proportion." He wasn't apologizing. He was shouting, attempting to rewrite a literal felony into a minor misunderstanding. I didn't answer him. I simply ended the call. Seconds later, a text message from Kayla slid across the screen, smooth as silk but dripping with toxic gaslighting. "Mom, Laura, Tyler, and I genuinely think you should consider a psychological evaluation. Elderly people tend to become overly sensitive and paranoid about control. The cabin was just sitting there, completely wasting away in the woods. We sold it to optimize family assets for the collective future of this family. They didn't see the forgery of my name on a legal deed as a crime. They saw it as an administrative necessity, an entitlement that was being inconveniently blocked by an old woman who refused to stay in her place." The evening brought the peak of their shamelessness. A notification popped up on my tablet. Kayla had posted a public status on Facebook, complete with a high-resolution photo of a lavish dinner at a private, exclusive club in downtown Denver. She was holding a champagne flute, smiling for the audience she so desperately cultivated. The caption beneath the photo read, "Some people hold on to their money their entire lives just to build a coffin for their own selfishness, completely forgetting who will actually be standing by their deathbed later." I stared at the glowing blue light of the screen. My son and daughter-in-law had spent 11 years treating my life's labor as a resource to be managed and depleted, and now they were weaponizing public sympathy to paint me as the villain. Most people would have panicked or driven to their house to scream. But my anger wasn't loud. It was entirely clinical. Every remaining ounce of maternal hesitation dropped to zero. I stood up, walked across my office, and pulled the heavy drapes shut, blocking out the Denver night. I sat back down at my desk, clicked on the brass lamp, and pulled the yellow legal pad into the exact center of the light. They had chosen to use their social circles and public platforms to validate their toxicity. They wanted a public war. I was going to give them an ironclad legal execution. I didn't drive to Tyler's house to scream. I didn't waste my breath on another circular argument. Instead, I drove directly to the downtown office of Robert, the attorney who had protected low mechanical controls for 30 years. Robert sat across from me, his silver hair catching the morning light, his sharp eyes holding the absolute calm of a man who had seen every variety of greed. He listened to my summary, without a hint of surprise. He simply reached for his phone and dialed Brian, the top forensic auditor in Denver. I handed over everything to Brian, the real deed, the forged closing files, the bank statements, and the full history of the joint investment account I had set up for my son. Everything stayed silent for 14 days, but inside my head, the airless quiet of that phone call kept echoing. Then, Brian's report arrived on my desk. It was a 42-page document meticulously organized inside a series of color-coded folders. Green tabs for direct wire records, red for the investment transactions, and bright yellow for Kayla's corporate entities. Reading through those color-coded lines sent a physical chill straight down my spine. Of the $44,600 Tyler had withdrawn from our shared account under the explicit presentation of acquiring undervalued properties, only $1,200 accounted for legitimate professional fees. The remaining balance had been transferred directly into Kayla's private checking account. From there, the capital had run through a network of shell corporations, eventually exiting to entities registered to addresses that turned out to be nothing more than rented UPS store mailboxes. Kayla's restaurant wasn't a failed dream. The green energy consulting projects weren't casualties of a tough market. They were a carefully engineered mechanism, a systematic extraction protocol, run with patient clinical execution. They had fallen completely into the psychological trap of normalized cruelty. Parasitic family members possess a terrifying capacity to rationalize their entitlement. In their minds, they weren't committing a felony. They looked at my 40 years of labor, looked at my success, and told themselves, she has more than enough money, she doesn't need this, and it will all be ours eventually anyway. We are just accelerating the timeline to fund our lifestyle. The financial loss didn't shatter my world. A business owner knows how to write off a bad debt. What broke something inside me was the absolute rot of their character, a cold malice masked by designer, clothing, and country club smiles. Inside my office, the color-coded folders glowed under the desk lamp, a lethal testament of facts and numbers. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was a balance sheet of total betrayal. This ceased to be a quiet transaction of family betrayal. It was now an active criminal operation. Thanks to Robert's immediate filings, Detective Stephanie from the Denver Financial Crimes Division officially took over the file. On a bitter, grey Tuesday morning, she called me into her office. The room was small, smelling faintly of industrial floor cleaner and old coffee, lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs that hummed against the drop ceiling. Through the scratched glass partition, she handed me a certified copy of the closing file from the title company in Denver. There it was. The deed transfer for the Estes Park cabin. The final transaction amount read $340,000, distributed entirely to a private account held by Tyler and Kayla. Stephanie pointed the tip of her pen at the bottom of the page. My name was stamped there, a cursive signature that looked 90% identical to my own. It was close enough to fool an underpaid title clerk working through a stack of end-of-month closings. Tyler had secretly colluded with a corrupt notary public to get the document stamped, providing the artificial layer of legitimacy required to bypass the title company's final verification checks. But to a woman who has signed over 10,000 construction bonds and engineering payrolls, the fraud was glaringly obvious. The lines were too uniform. There was no natural variation in the ink pressure, no human hesitation in the loop of the letter L. It was a digital ghost of my identity, mathematically replicated and applied via software to execute a theft. But the absolute bottom of their trap was waiting in the zoning maps. Stephanie slid across the metal desk. The secondary twist she had uncovered stripped away any remaining shred of my son's humanity. Stephanie had pulled the upcoming federal infrastructure files, scheduled for public release next year. The 23 acres of protected pine forest my husband had spent his life conserving sat directly in the core acquisition zone for the upcoming high-speed interstate highway expansion. Tyler and Kayla had discovered this through an insider contact at the Regional Planning Commission. They knew that when the state initiated eminent domain next year, the true condemnation value of that land would be at least triple the $340,000. They didn't just sell the cabin. They deliberately hid the massive impending windfall from me, running a midnight race to sell the deed at a severe discount to a rival commercial contracting company I had beaten out for infrastructure contracts for decades. They sacrificed my husband's legacy for a quick cash payout, funneling the proceeds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands before I could ever discover the project. I sat under the humming fluorescent lights, looking at the highway blueprints. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He had weaponized insider data to sell his father's sacred ground to my bitterest corporate adversary. They weren't just ungrateful children playing dangerous games. They were predatory, cold-blooded criminals executing a systematic asset strip. The criminal warrants were officially signed. There was no family left to save. There was only a target to neutralize. The supreme satisfaction of justice is always executed best under broad daylight, right where those who live behind a social mask are forced to tear it down themselves. That evening was the Colorado Builders and Developers Annual Gala at the Grand Hyatt Denver. 200 of the state's most powerful business minds filled the ballroom. I walked in wearing a tailored charcoal grey suit, my husband's old steel mechanical calipers resting heavy in my jacket pocket like an anchor of reality. In the central tier of the room, under the brilliant glare of the crystal chandeliers, Tyler and Kayla sat at a prominent table, dressed in luxury garments funded entirely by my stolen capital. The moment the floor opened for announcements, Tyler walked to the stage and picked up the microphone with the ease of a man who believed his social standing could insulate him from accountability. His voice projected beautifully across the room. "I apologize for the sudden interruption," he said, looking directly at my table. "Many of you know my mother, Laura Lowe, and the legacy she built. Right now, there is a painful misunderstanding between us regarding a piece of family property that has gotten out of hand. I am asking publicly, in front of the people who loved my father, for a chance to sit down and make it right. Mum, can we talk?" The entire ballroom turned to look at me, 200 pairs of eyes waiting to see if a mother's guilt could force a public reconciliation. I didn't flinch. I stood up calmly, buttoned my grey jacket, and walked onto the stage. Tyler offered a manufactured smile, extending the microphone, but his expression disintegrated when I ignored his hand entirely. Instead, I nodded to the audio-visual coordinator at the back of the room. The 500-inch presentation screen behind us instantly flashed to life. It wasn't a family photo, it was the 14-slide forensic audit Brian had compiled. The ballroom fell into a breathless quiet as the data points filled the room. Slide 1, a massive signature analysis, displaying the exact geometric distortion of my forged name on the deed transfer. Slide 2, the mapping of $44,600 flowing directly into Kayla's private checking account and out to shell entities registered to UPS store mailboxes. Slide 3, the official criminal indictment for deed fraud and identity forgery, stamped with a massive red seal from the district attorney's office, finalized just 2 hours ago. My voice didn't waver as I spoke into the room's microphone, sounding as cold as a valve system. My son claims this is a misunderstanding. But engineering does not recognize the concept of a misunderstanding. There is only a structurally sound design, or a complete structural failure. What you are looking at is a systematic, 11-year extraction operation. Right then, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Detective Stephanie entered, flanked by 2 uniformed Denver police officers. They moved down the central aisle with clinical speed. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed clearly beneath the crystal chandeliers. Tyler collapsed to his knees at my feet, his face flushed, his eyes wild with terror as he gripped the hem of my trousers. "Mom, please, stop this," he sobbed. "We will lose everything." I looked down at the son I'd spent 11 years protecting and felt nothing but a clean, cold absence of emotion. "You aren't losing everything because of me, Tyler," I said quietly. "You are simply receiving the exact output of your own mathematical inputs. Goodbye." The officers hauled them out through the rear exit, leaving a ruined gala and an empire of lies entirely shattered into dust. A week after the gala night, I sat in Robert's quiet conference room. My entire estate, worth over $15 million, including my Denver home, retirement funds, business equity, and investments, was permanently redirected. Even the $340,000 in restitution ordered from the cancelled cabin sale was funneled directly into this fund. It would provide full apprenticeship scholarships for young men and women learning trade skills like machining, welding, and electrical systems at the Colorado College of Applied Technology. Tyler and Kayla's sentence came down swiftly in February. They were sentenced to 8 years in state prison for grand larceny and wire fraud, with a mandatory minimum of 2 years to be served before any parole consideration. The judge also ordered the immediate seizure and liquidation of their assets under a strict restitution order to repay the $340,000 within 18 months. Their shell companies were permanently frozen, and their synthetic luxury lifestyle was completely dismantled. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. More than that, it was an act of cultivation. True justice doesn't lie in the destruction of those who hurt you, it lies in the creation of something beautiful from the ruins. When I saw Tyler standing in that courtroom, small, pale, and stripped of his manufactured arrogance, I realized his actions no longer held any power over my life. I didn't use my victory to nurse a bitter grudge. I used it to sow seeds for young people who actually know how to work with their hands and build things that last. Choosing to sever a relationship with your only biological child is a profound, gut-wrenching pain. But it was a necessary act of survival to reclaim my dignity. Blood relations are merely a biological accident. True family is defined by those who show up, respect your boundaries, and honor your existence. Walking out of that courthouse into the crisp Colorado air, I breathed fully for the first time in 11 years. I felt an absolute, unshakable sense of freedom. Now, I want to speak directly to you. If you are listening to this right now, carrying the invisible weight of being exploited, ignored, or treated like an afterthought by the people who are supposed to love you, listen to me closely. I've come to realize that you must never normalize cruelty just because it wears the mask of family. When someone repeatedly overdrafts your compassion and shrugs it off with a casual line like, "But we're family," that isn't love. That is predatory manipulation. You have a moral obligation to protect your life's work and your peace of mind. Forgiveness isn't always about granting a clean slate to the person who broke you sometimes. It is about setting yourself completely free from their chaos. You do not owe your loyalty to a shared last name when they have abandoned the baseline of human respect. Build your boundaries out of steel. It is okay to walk away. Sometimes, the most magnificent response to betrayal isn't dynamic warfare. It is building a life so bright, so purposeful, and so deeply grounded in truth that their opinions simply cease to matter. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs the courage to set their own boundaries today, please share this video, hit that like button, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep building this community of strength together.